I always ask them, what are you looking for in a candidate that you haven't seen so far? Because if you just say, hey, I need to hire a CFO, well, cool, I can go find you a CFO. But if I'm just giving you the same people that you've already seen, then it's we're not going to be successful. And also it reveals, are they looking for a purple unicorn? Because if they're like, well, I want to hire a CFO who also is a salesperson, who also knows how to, change a tire and do all the other things. Well, I'm like, okay. So you're looking for the purple unicorn or the purple squirrel, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to have to really work with this hiring manager to make sure that we are narrowing down what are the must haves and what are the nice to have.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Your Customer, Your Success. My guest today is Justin Dixon. Justin is the founder of Hire Tomorrow, a recruiting firm that helps private equity firms and fast-growing startups hire the right talent from C-suite leaders to sales, marketing, finance, and technology roles. He spent 20 years in the corporate world in talent acquisition at well-known names such as Comcast, Stroll, ADP, and Aerotech. He is also a brave podcast host. Justin is the host of the Growth Capital podcast, where he interviews private equity leaders, CEOs of PE-backed companies, and founders about building and scaling businesses and the role talent plays in driving growth. Justin, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, this is great. And just, if the name Dixon rings a bell, we now have our first husband and wife team to join Your Customer, Your Success. Allison Dixon, the wife of Justin, was on episode 29. Cybersecurity, head of CX, great episode with Allison. And then I said, hey, your husband's a podcast host. And I took a look at your background and said, hey, I think we have a second match here. So here we are. So
yeah,
this is
I'm sure she will be a much better guest than I am. She is definitely my better half. That is for sure.
You have a high bar to cover here today, but I think this is going to be great. It's going to be well timed, right? Because we're talking about talent acquisition, hiring, job search. It is brutal out there, right? It's the end of the year. It's time when a lot of people are shaking their heads and might be a little down on themselves. So we're here to kind of help pep them up and give them some valuable thoughts and valuable advice. So
yep.
Let's start the bidding with this. This might be the understatement of the year in terms of talking about job search, but I remember a day when startups were considered risky and big corporate companies were considered safe. Anybody that knows anything knows that's totally flipped on its ear. But why do you believe big companies are no longer the safe bet that they used to be? What's going on out there? What do you see?
Well, I think there's a couple things that people think of when they think about safe. They think of big companies versus small companies because inherently there's more people, they're, less risky, maybe they're in different industries. But I've worked in big companies, I've worked in small companies, and a lot of times when you're in a big company, you feel safe because there's a bunch of people, there's thousands of employees, and you don't know that you are just a line item on some finance guy's or gal's spreadsheet. And especially if they're a publicly traded company or they're backed by some private equity or venture capital group, they need to hit their numbers. And the most expensive line item on the budget is typically people. And so, I've worked in big companies and I've even heard of people more recently getting laid off literally out of the blue, not having no kind of warning. Nobody gave them a heads up. They couldn't see or read between the lines. And so I think that inherently causes them to be a little bit more risky, especially with in the world of AI, where big companies are trying to cut costs, do more with less. And so they're just trying to implement technology across every part of the company. And that sometimes will eliminate talent. Now, I don't think it's as abundant as people are reporting that all of these 4,000 or 5,000 jobs that big companies are laying off are all because of AI. I don't think that's necessarily the case. But I think in the future that will continue to be the case where big companies have the bigger budgets and have the ability to implement more technology. And so I think that big companies, their safe mantra is starting to rub off, and startups are looking a little bit more interesting because the flip side of that is startups, you have a little bit more line of sight into the leadership. You have a little bit more line of sight into how the company is doing. So you can typically see the writing on the wall if you look hard enough, and maybe you can avoid being laid off and you can go find your next gig versus having the axe fall, on a random Friday and you kind of wake up the next morning without a job.
Yeah. And so true. And I think let's get back to that AI point you made there. I keep hearing, and this is driving me crazy, layoffs followed by because of AI. And when you're talking about 4,000 people, I don't think that can be true.
I think I think it can be true and false at the exact same time. I don't think all 4,000 people were directly laid off because of AI implementations. I think there's a lot of things that have happened over the last 4 or 5 years where everybody overhired in 2021, 2022. Capital was very inexpensive. And so startups were getting a ton of money, big companies were getting a ton of money. And so people just overhired coming out of the pandemic. And I think we're still seeing the remnants of that, especially in big companies where they're looking at efficiencies, which all companies look for efficiencies as they grow, and technology, not just AI, can offer some efficiencies. And so some of those 4,000 could it be directly related to an AI chatbot being implemented and made a person redundant? Maybe, but I think it's a very very small proportion,
Yeah.
of those 4,000 or 10,000, wherever the number is. But I'm not a future seer, but I think that AI is going to continue to disrupt the talent landscape, both trying to find a job and trying to keep one.
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting at. It's, it's incrementally helping people do their jobs better. Is it really replacing anybody? I don't know. You could make the case for AI agents and not needing as many people in a support center and things like that. But I just feel like, yeah, it's being used to justify a large amount of layoffs. And the real reason is what you alluded to at the beginning, the bottom line, and
Yeah.
making a margin or whatever. And that's the troubling thing to me, is that it's, you've got a great chance at implementing a wonderful new set of technologies. And what we're trying to do on the show is encourage people to do it the right way. And when I hear that, it just makes my spidey sense tingle, shall we say.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of opportunity to implement and I'm sure you've had a lot of guests on to talk about AI and how to use it in your business or your daily lives. And,
Hmm.
if you're not, you are putting yourself at a disadvantage because, AI is here to stay. Who knows what the next version or the version after that is going to look like. But like any technology, if you think it's not going to impact you, it probably will before you know it. And
That's
so you
right.
always need to be a little bit on the forefront. You don't need to be a first adopter of all the technology that's out there and test all the things. But regardless of if you're trying to get your first job or your last, you should probably have some education around the AI tools and how to use them and all that fun stuff. So
Right, and that's what we're trying to do here in the show, is educate people a little bit, because the hype is so overwhelming, and we're trying to clear through the mud and the kind of vague generalities that are thrown out there to get people thinking in the right terms, especially when things like agentic AI, right? We've talked about that before, and no one seems to use that term correctly or even know what the heck it really is. They just blurted out there that it's the next wave of AI. So, okay, we're not here to talk about AI. We're talking about the job market, job search. Let me just ask you one thing before we get back to kind
yeah,
of the track I wanted. You're in Texas, I believe,
Austin.
and
Yep.
so, yep. Do you see regionally? Obviously, it's a big country. Things are going to be different in different parts of the country. Do you have any insight into what's going on around the country? Different anywhere growth sectors? How is the whole work from home? And you can kind of work from anywhere for a lot of people, but now there's the back to office thing where a
Yep.
lot of companies are like, get your rear ends back in the office. How does that play into what you're seeing out there?
I think the companies that are doing the full return to office 5 days a week mandate, as of X date, if you're not in the office, you're fired kind of thing. I think that's aggressive. And it's also limiting from a recruitment perspective. I've had a few clients that have said, hey, we are 100% in office. And I said, okay, cool. That's fine. I can help you with that position and help you find somebody. But you took your talent pool from the entire US to this, right? And maybe you want to be hybrid, and hybrid, while it's not the small regional area that you're in, you can have a little bit more of a radius around that. But I totally get companies wanting to be back in office for a lot of reasons, culture, et cetera, et cetera. I think the where we'll settle out, and I've seen this a lot, is companies have a preferred location, which we'd love to hire somebody here in Austin because we have an office here, our executives are here, et cetera. But we're open to, if the right candidate lives in another state, we're open to that option as well. So whenever I start working on a position, I tell my clients or ask my clients, like, what is the bullseye? Like, what is the perfect scenario for you from candidate experience, like what their background is and also location. And I say, okay, let's try to hit the bullseye first. If we can't, then we start to radiate out around those bullseyes, around that bullseye, and make sure we're finding the right person for them. So I think from a industry perspective, and where people are seeing the pain, it's kind of across the board. I think healthcare seems to still be pretty resistant to
Yeah.
kind of some of the things that are going on in the global economy. Um, I have a lot of friends and clients that I work with in SaaS and technology, and depending on the level and the role, it can be a little bit more difficult. And also now, because of the hybrid focus, if you did move during COVID and said, "Cool, I can work fully remote, so I'm going to move to this obscure town in the middle of nowhere," then your job prospects are limited because you have to be fully remote. And while there are still plenty of jobs out there that offer fully remote, um, sometimes those jobs are, like I just described, they want to have a specific location and they're open to remote. So they're going to start with somebody in their geographical area and then start to radiate out. So just be prepared. If you are only looking for a fully remote role, that may make your job search a little bit longer.
Yeah. And I love that kind of hub and spoke kind of model where, yeah, have a center. And if you're around there, great. But consider people from other places because you are expanding your talent pool.
Yep.
And so I'm big on work from home, but it's not that I don't like being in the office. With me, I've said before, we've got kids and everything, and there's just work life balance, where my wife cannot work from home. So, very interesting stuff. So, all right, so let's talk a little bit more about the smaller companies in those environments, and how you know. So we want to talk about looking for that maybe safer environment. So how are these companies, from your perspective, creating that environment where people can actually grow and stick, rather than looking over their shoulder for the guy or lady coming with the layoff slip?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I think is inherently interesting about startups or small businesses, and this may not make it any safer or less safe, but is that you have the ability to create your own path. And so you may get hired into a job doing sales or marketing or HR, but a lot of startups, you need to find people that are scrappy and willing to, work outside of their typical area of focus. And so if you're one of those people that is like, cool, I'm going to come in and do whatever I can to help make this company successful, that tends to be rewarded more so in startups, and you have a lot more opportunity to do that than you do in a big company where, if you're a salesperson in some division, that division gets laid off. They don't always just repurpose you into a new division, right?
No.
Or if you're an HR person or a recruiter or whatever, if the thing you're working on is no longer needed or sold, then the town is no longer needed. And so, you know, Allison is a perfect example of this because she works at a startup right now. She started there as their head of HR. She now is their chief customer officer, and she did that in 2 years. That would not happen. Even trying to go from HR to, she went from HR to operations. She led IT. She led all these other things that she's never managed before in her life. But because she's a awesome person and very, very smart, and she raised her hand and said, "Hey, I can help, so we don't have to go spend money and hire another person and make it a little bit more kind of specialized." She's like, "Hey, cool. Give me a shot. Let me try this." And luckily the leadership there was willing to do that. And so, if you're that type of person where you're willing to roll up your sleeves and get down to work, startups can be very rewarding than going into just being a cog in a wheel at a big company.
Yeah, that is a great point because that is 100% true. If you're going to make cuts, you're going to make cuts. Very
Yep.
rarely we say, well, I think people tend to think, I've been here 20 years. They value me. They'll just slide me over to sales or something, like just like, and maybe I'll be offered to come back. And I've seen it happen, but that's kind of odd here and there
Yep.
that people will get laid off and come back. Now, do I think companies should do more of that? Yeah. Are they doing that? No.
Yeah, there has been a little bit of a boomerang effect, especially over the last few years, because a lot of people, during COVID, maybe they did move and they left, or they were asked to come back to an office and like, I'm not coming back. So they decided to, take another job. And so I have seen a little bit of boomerang, meaning you leave a company and come back after, a year or two. I don't know if people do it in a programmatic way where companies really try to find, ex employees, other than consulting firms. Consulting firms do that really well. They have a very strong internal, like
Really?
Accenture, EY. They have a very good placement service. So like if you are like, hey, I want to come here and do really well for a couple of years and then go out and work for a client, they have a very good structure to help do that, because
That's great.
their whole model is, okay, cool. If we help you get a job at a client, you're going to then use us, or more likely use us, for any consulting work. So um, there are firms that put a lot of effort into helping employees offboard and then come back as needed. There's a lot of companies that had or have alumni sites, so you can go see what it's like to still work here and who you still know and all that stuff. But just on the big company kind of layoff thing, like I have friends that literally in the last 2 months and I worked with them before. And so they were like, and they were very good employees. They were very loyal, and they were laid off. And so being laid off does not always mean you're the lowest person on the totem pole from a performance perspective. It just could mean you're in the wrong seat at the wrong time.
Right. And I've seen that for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
I just, the business shut down. Like I had a great company I worked for. They just were not competitive in private wealth. Basically let everybody go. Didn't mean the people in the private wealth team weren't any good. It's just, we weren't going to compete with the big players in the industry. So, yeah, so that is an interesting point. Okay, so let's get to some kind of tangible things to do, right? Because the goal of this episode, we're saying, well, gee, you're a CX podcast, Gare. What are you doing here? I promised folks, one, we focus on employee experience. So the points you've made actually are a great thing to think about when it comes to employee experience. At a smaller firm, you could grow, you can develop, just like you told Allison's great example. That's great stuff. That's great employee experience. But I want to get to some tangible advice, some to-dos for people. So I'm going to start the bidding with this question. If you were job searching today, maybe perhaps you did get laid off, or maybe you're worried you're going to get laid off and you haven't done it in 5 and 10 years, right? Things have changed. So what's the number one change you'd make to the job search, or 2 or 3, whatever you want, compared to 5, 10 years ago? What should people be doing if they're in a bad spot or they think they're in a bad spot?
I would say there's no silver bullet. First of all, there's no thing that you can wake up tomorrow and be like, cool, this is going to be something that nobody else is doing and I'm going to get a job tomorrow. But the things that I would think about is networking. Look at your network, look at who you're connected to, and don't be afraid to ask for help. I'm not a big fan of the very personal posts on LinkedIn, specifically that platform, about how you're laid off and all of that. I think that while it brings eyeballs, it's maybe not the best eyeballs to help you find your next gig. I would probably keep that maybe private or on a different social media platform if you feel compelled to share that. I think the networking piece is, especially in this world of AI, and I'll talk about that here in a second. You are competing with not only other job applicants, but now you are competing with fake AI generated resumes. And so the one thing I would say about kind of tactical things that you can do outside of networking and reaching out to people is thinking about who is the first thing that is going to review your resume is not the hiring manager. A lot of people create resumes, they hire resume writers, and they create these really beautifully looking, very word heavy resumes, regardless of if you're a CEO or you're getting your first job. But that the hiring manager sees your resume third, fourth, or fifth in a line of things. So one, I would think about having 2 resumes that have very similar content on them, data on them. One is a Word document that is very bland. It is very not overly formatted. You don't have your picture on there. You don't have crazy graphics on there, because the first thing that's going to see your resume is a piece of software called an applicant tracking system. Now, the one thing that doesn't scare me about AI, or gives me a little bit of pause on AI taking recruiter's job, is they still can't figure out how to parse a resume for some reason. I don't know why that is the most difficult thing in the world for software to solve. But I think, and that's been going on since I've been in the recruiting world, for almost 20 years. So, but my point of the matter is, have a resume that's going to not get dinged automatically by an applicant tracking system. So having pictures, having crazy format, all that stuff makes it more difficult for the system to move you and have that score you, because that's what applicant tracking systems do now, is they look at your resume, compare it to the job description, they give you a score as a candidate. And sometimes recruiters will sort the candidate or applicant pool based on the score that the software gives them, right? So you want to make sure that you are putting your best foot forward from a candidate and a resume perspective. So having a resume that has all the information that you have on your other really pretty resume, but it is very not overly formatted because you're just going to put it into a system, right? So that's the first thing that you need to pass that test is passing the okay, my resume was formatted correctly and it was actually uploaded correctly into the applicant tracking system. The next thing is your next person that's actually going to review your resume is a recruiter. And I've been a recruiter for 20 years now almost, and I can say this because I am one. Most recruiters have never done the job that they are recruiting for. So I've hired a ton of software engineers in my life. I don't know how to code. I don't know what coding is, but I can figure out, how to hire a software engineer. So you've got to make your resume what I call recruiter friendly, because recruiters spend anywhere from 4 to 6 seconds looking at your resume before, and in that 4 to 6 seconds, they determine, am I going to spend any more time on this resume because I think there's some interesting things on it, or am I going to go on to the next one? And especially now that when you're applying to jobs, you're not going to be competing with 50 or 100 resumes. You're going to be competing with hundreds or thousands for each job. So recruiters inherently just don't have enough time to go through and look at every single resume. So I think those first two things is having a resume that is applicant tracking friendly and recruiter friendly is important, because you still have to apply to jobs. I don't think you should not apply to jobs. You definitely should. And then you can still have that really pretty resume that's formatted really cool and has all the cool things. And you email that to a recruiter or the hiring manager once you get that initial, hey, Gary, I'd love to schedule you for an interview. And you can say, cool, I just want to make sure you have my updated resume. I've attached it here. Please share that with the hiring manager, et cetera, et cetera. So you can still have the both, but make sure you have one that's AI and recruiter friendly.
Yeah, no, that is great advice, and I've heard very similar takes in just my experience as well. Have that ATS friendly version that scans well, and that's what you would use to apply to anything. But you can have I call it the presentation resume.
Yeah.
If somebody says, "Hey, my buddy's the CEO of whatever, whatever," and that fine, right? Because
Yep.
you're just sending that for network. If you're doing your networking and you say hey, you should talk to so and so, you can have that one handy.
Yep.
But absolutely, those tracking systems, the numbers are staggering. If you look on LinkedIn, and just anybody who hasn't heard this, if you go to LinkedIn and you click on a job and it says apply, and it will tell you how many people have quote unquote applied. That doesn't necessarily mean that's how many people have applied. I think I have this right. It means that's how many people hit the apply button. They might
Yeah.
not have
On
followed
LinkedIn.
through. Yeah, on
Yep, that doesn't
LinkedIn.
include other, like their own website or Indeed or any other of the aggregators. It's just through
Right.
LinkedIn.
But that doesn't mean they actually went through with the application, because they
Right.
might hit at a Workday site, and that's the most, I don't want to say the worst, but the most complicated to
Yeah.
upload and parse your resume. And so people might give up or go back later. I've heard 40 to 60% of the, have applied on LinkedIn. Maybe that's the
Yeah, it
number of,
depends
if,
on the complication of the application process. So the next thing we'll probably talk about is AI bots. So you can hire a bot to apply for you, right? So
yeah.
you can give them your resume and give them a few keywords, and it'll apply to hundreds of jobs for you. And while as a candidate, that sounds great. So you can be applying to jobs while laying in your pool, depending on where you are in the country or the world and the season. But that everybody else is doing that now. And so, they are inherently creating fake resumes. And so what's happening is, like I said before, recruiters and HR departments are being overrun by applicants that, some estimates are like 40 to 50% of them are not real people. And so it's just making it very, very complicated. And also on the flip side, as a candidate, there are a lot of jobs that are being posted that are fake also. And so, as a candidate right now, it is very difficult to find a job for a lot of reasons, but AI is not making it any easier, even though some of the tools that they offer, like bots and things like that, say that it's making it easier. So it's just a very challenging job market at the moment. And so that's why going back a little old school and talking to people and networking and seeing who works at a company that you like or has a job opening and reaching out to that person is probably your path of least resistance in trying to find your next role.
Yeah, it is amazing the paradox where technology is here to help you and help, but it is making things more difficult, if you ask me. And you just so eloquently proved it. All right, so let's talk about the networking because to me, networking obviously is the key, but it is very a long term process. If you ask me, it could be very slow. You could get lucky. Look, you could talk to somebody. Hey, I want to reconnect. I haven't talked to you in 2 years. We used to work together, and they could say, "Come over here. The water's fine."
Yep.
But you got lucky if that happens, right? So um, talk to us a little bit about some good strategies for targeting these smaller firms in your job search. How you suggest you go about the networking and targeting the right firms.
First of all, if anybody's listening to this and they have a job that they like, and they may think about moving a job in a year or two, start networking now. Like I tell people, whenever the best time to look for a job or be open to jobs are when you have one that you like, because you can be very selective and very picky. And so networking just feels like having a chat with people versus trying to have them introduce you to other people. So, start networking now, just because it can be fun, but also it can help you, shorten your time horizon for finding a job. So, if you are out without a job and you're starting your networking process and you're trying to maybe be interested in smaller companies, it's not if you're in a geography like in Austin or San Francisco or places that have a lot of a startup scene, and you want to get into that, there's a ton of events that you can go to. You don't have to be a startup founder. You don't have to be a technical person to go and just participate and go to the happy hours or the presentations. But those are your best bets of going. And I meet people that are always there looking for jobs. And that's a great place to go because you're going to meet people that are there to network. And so it is very common for people to be like, hell, oh, I know somebody over here that let me introduce you. Whether it's I'm going to walk you across the room and introduce you to somebody, or I'm going to send a LinkedIn message or an email, the next day or the next week. So find local meetups. I mean, meetup.com is a great place just to go find things. If you're passionate about, basket weaving and you want to figure that out, like maybe that's a great place to go because you may find people that are at the basket weaving, expo that work in a big company, right? Most people don't make their living basket weaving. So, I think there's a myriad of ways to go about kind of the networking side of it. But if you are actively on a job search, apply to jobs. I think that's still a viable thing. However, I would not spend 8 hours a day applying to jobs. If you're out of work and you have 8 hours in a day that you're going to look for a job, maybe spend an hour or two applying, but then finding companies that are in your area that you would love to work at. Maybe they don't have a job open right now, but you know people there. Talk to them, reach out to them, and say, "Hey, I'm looking for this type of a job, or I'm open to a change." And you never know who is gonna. There's always a sixth degree of Kevin Bacon, right? Like you never know who's going to know somebody that knows somebody, and that's just kind of how it works. So there's no silver bullet. Unfortunately, I wish I could come on here and say, I've got the golden ticket for you to figure out the job search right now. It is work. It is a full-time job. I know people that thought it was going to be a 3-month process, and they're on their 7th or 8th month of unemployment right now. Um, if you have the ability to volunteer, whether it's a nonprofit that you like, or just helping, if you want to get in the startup world, like volunteering at different startup events, like those are great ways to add value and also add some, credibility to why you want to join a startup or anything like that. But those are great ways to find people that can connect you to, companies or people of power, et cetera, et cetera. But
Yep.
it is a work. It is a slog. It is work to find a job, especially right now.
Yeah, and the sooner the better, right? I think it was
Yeah.
great advice to get going if you're even thinking of it or if you're concerned about your future at a company because it does take some time, but you can do things. And I think the networking isn't just having necessarily the coffee talk and chats with people. It's more of what you just said, getting involved in something. And that's kind of how I got involved in the world of CX, to be honest with you. I've always been a customer focused person, client facing, but we never really used the word CX or talked about NPS scores because we were right in front of the clients. We were more of more like a SaaS customer success manager. And I started just looking for a better way of doing things and attending these sessions on LinkedIn Live. People do their own sessions, and then started listening to podcasts and started
Mm.
learning. And that was like 3 years ago. And all of a sudden, then I said, you know what? I want to start talking about this. I started the podcast. Now, I'm not recommending starting a podcast because it's fine if you want to. I encourage you, but it's a lot of work. But if you're currently employed and you've got something to say, be a guest, start
Yeah.
going on podcasts, try to speak somewhere, something like that. That's the kind of thing that gets you out there and gets you known for what you're doing.
Yeah.
And even if you're not working, you can still go and you can still try to speak to different groups and teams and join these networking groups and just get out there and get known. That's the best advice I can give you.
Yeah, one of the things that, and it is a tool that you can leverage. If you are like, if you do have something to say and you want to get on podcast, there's a website called podmatch.com. I've used it, and I've used it to get guests for my podcast, and I've also used it to be a guest on podcasts. And so, depending on what level you are in your career, it may be easier or harder to be a guest on a podcast. But that's a great way, because that's evergreen content.
Yeah.
I'm an introvert by nature, so I don't love doing the video posts about things and all that. But doing a podcast, being a guest or like this, or being a host, is a lot of fun, frankly. And two, it's a safe place to have a chat with somebody and hopefully share some advice or get some advice. And it's also really good for you to share as you're looking for a job. It's like, oh, cool, check out my podcast that I talked about X,
Right.
about some topic. So.
Right. And I use Podmatch as well. So Alex will be very happy with us. We did not plan that. You're welcome, Alex.
Yep.
But it is great.
Sponsor.
Yeah. there is the link always below in the show notes. So no, but it has been great. I guess that's how Allison and I connected, and Chris Hood and a number of other people. So it has been very helpful for me
Yep.
as a new podcast host, because my concern when I started doing this, who the hell's going to want to be on my show? Right. I'm not going to be begging people to be on the show. And it's been the opposite. I got people coming to me and I'm like, oh my God, I got so many wonderful people want to be on the show. So it's been great. But get out there. If you like to, you don't have to, if you don't like public speaking, start a blog, start writing something like that too. So there's plenty of other ways to get out there and get known, so to speak. All right. So we have a few minutes left. I got so many questions for you. Oh my gosh. Let me see. Hang on one second. All right, let's switch gears a little bit because we have a few minutes left in the traditional interview section of the show. What can hiring managers and companies do better? I mean, it is awful out there, and I think that's well known. What are hiring managers getting wrong about evaluating the talent in the new market, and what do they need to do differently going into the new year?
That's a loaded question.
That's why I asked it.
I would say, I mean, there's still the age old no feedback, right? Going into, if you're an applicant and you apply to a job that you think you're perfect fit for, and you go into the black hole that is an applicant tracking system, and, you either, excuse me, you either get an instant ding, an instant rejection email. And it's like, well, nobody obviously looked at my resume in the second that I applied. I think, just some common decorum of not just having a delay on that, and applicant tracking systems all have a delay feature where they can automatically ding somebody for maybe they're outside the geography that they want or whatever, but also providing feedback. And I think in this world of AI, everybody's trying to automate and outsource everything to technology, and it's like I think being a little bit more human is helpful, because we are more connected via technology than we ever have been. But I think there's a lot more people that feel very alone. And so if you're applying to a job and you have no idea why you're being rejected, if you did get the job, if you did get an interview, providing some type of feedback is always helpful. Whether it's, hey, you weren't the right fit, or we found somebody better, or whatever, or hey, you didn't answer this question well, and maybe that will help that person on the next interview with another company. As a third party recruiter, we always get kind of the poor end of the stick, if you will, because a lot of times we don't get feedback from hiring managers, and sometimes they just don't provide us any feedback. So when I have candidates that I have to say, hey, sorry, they moved on to somebody else, and they say, well, what was the reason? I don't have feedback to give them, which is frustrating for me, but also frustrates the candidate, and they have a poor experience. So I think hiring teams, while I think technology can help automate and make sure a lot more people are being seen, and I'll talk about AI interviews here in a second. But I think not removing the human from the process too much can be very helpful. Making sure that somebody is still there to answer questions, provide feedback, help them move from one step to the interview process to the next. I think those things are, again, none of this is rocket science and none of this is new. This is all things that have been talked about, and candidates have been frustrated about for years.
Right.
And so I think just continuing to do that, that's a differentiator. Like if you have a good experience, you're going to recommend that company to, or that recruitment firm to your friends, family, et cetera. And so, and on the inverse of that, if you have a poor experience, you're probably going to do the same thing, but you may take it a step farther and share something on a platform that will not only go to your social circle but to the world. Glassdoor, all these other platforms, just putting it on LinkedIn, and that can have a very negative effect on that company, right? And so, which may be your goal, but I think those things will be, especially in the world of technology that we're in right now, like having that human touch and having one person. If you say, hey, cool, that person had a really positive experience, they didn't get the job, but they still hold that company in high regard, they may come back in a year or two and get a job, and they may be a great employee, right? So you always need to be thinking more long term as a company, not trying to have people have a bad experience, which would then lead them to do something, either post something online, or never apply again, which could ultimately be a negative that the company won't necessarily realize, but it could be just a negative that maybe they could have had a great employee down the road. I think one thing that's kind of fascinating right now is the push for AI interviewing. And I can argue all sides of the coin for or against. But one of the reasons for it is that more people get a shot, get an interview, even though that
Mm.
interview is with a bot, that is just reading kind of questions and having you answer them, and then transcribing those and then sharing them with the recruitment team and probably scoring them and doing all those other fun things, right? So theoretically, that will give more people that are applying to these jobs, a shot at being seen by a recruiter. So it's up to the candidate to decide if they want to or to do a video interview or not. Some companies are kind of, if you don't do a video interview, you're not being considered. Others, it's an opt-in scenario, so it's not precluding you from being potentially seen by a recruiter, but it gives you a better shot at it. And then I've seen people post online that if they get a video or an interview kind of scheduled with a bot, they decline and they move on to another company. So there's this balance of are you going to be a person that likes an AI interview or not? And I don't use AI interviews for any of my clients. I don't think that the AI interviewing process, for the clients that I work with is appropriate. I think for some clients and some companies, I think it could be interesting. But I think a lot of people have differing opinions on should you or shouldn't you use AI interviews, and also the risk that it potentially opens a company up to if they do use it.
Yeah, I've done a few of them. Now, I think it's appropriate if you're talking to an AI company. You might want to expect that you're going to get an AI interview. It is pretty interesting just to witness technology in action. But the first time it happened to me, I didn't. I got a text on my phone and it said, "Hi, this is Christine from Talent Acquisition at XYZ," but it was the bot. It was the
Mm,
AI, and like, "Can I talk to you about the role today at 10?" I'm like, "Yeah, great." I get on. It's, "Hello, I'm the bot." Like,
right.
but where's the person? So you
Oh,
just
you didn't know it was a bot. You
I didn't
assumed.
know because
See,
it gave
that's
a name and it was a little misleading. Now, if I went back, it did say I'm a technology, whatever. Like I just saw the thing on my phone as I was doing my morning walk, and I didn't look into it enough. But because it was just like, hey, can we talk at 10? So I figured
yeah,
it was a real person saying, hey, I just want to check. 'Cause a lot of times, sometimes it's like, look, you got a great resume. Let's make sure the numbers are in line here
right.
and whatever, and remote and this. So that's what I thought it was. And it was an AI interview.
How was the
So
actual interview? I know we're not, I'm not, you're the
that one
host, I'm
wasn't
the
very
guest.
good, as you can
Yeah.
imagine, because it wasn't like it wasn't very clear. I've done a few of them now. The ones for the AI companies that I partner with that were very good. So I've had both,
Mm,
and it does interpret what you say well and say like, well, tell me about this time that you helped a client with an investment problem or something, and then you go, that's interesting. Tell me what you did about the challenge with your settlements. Like, you know what I mean? It does somewhat interpret what you were saying and ask you a follow-up question. So I think that's pretty impressive because
yeah.
it shows it emulates reasoning, right? Now we know here from the show that AI cannot reason. It's just automation, and that's what we talk about. But that's
Yeah.
the point, is to emulate the reasoning through probability. So it does a pretty good job of that. So there's so much more we could talk about there. I want to spend some time on the segments as well. But any further tips on anyone for job searching that's going into the new year? Any last thoughts before we hit the segments?
I think the last thing I'd say is be open to being nimble and be open to different things. Like if you're a big company person, be open to a startup and vice versa. I don't think that while we talked earlier about how I think, you can make the argument that big companies are more risky than startups. You may think the other. I think so. So being open to either scenario, and also I know a lot of people that shut down their job search during the holidays, and I understand why. I would just disagree that you never know when the best job is going to be posted, or that you're going to be that you may just miss, and so you may not have to be as diligent as you are the rest of the year. But I would not take your foot fully off the gas when it comes to job hunting. Yes, Q1 it tends to be the most active job posting quarter of the year because everybody has new budgets and new jobs and all that fun stuff. So obviously you want to spend a lot of time in January and February, but you also can start laying the groundwork now. And who knows, either you're going to spend a lot of time now and have a lot of success in January, or you may find the best job now, because I have a client right now that they want to hire before the end of the year and they just opened the job. So, especially if you're in sales, a lot of times sales, they want to hire in January so they can hit the ground running. I would argue they should hire in December so they can be ready in January. So,
That's right.
that's all I'll say. I think just you don't have to do it as 8 hours a day, but spend time with family, recharge, all this fun stuff, but keep your eyes out.
Yeah, I agree. I was just going to say, get the groundwork done and get yourself set up for that January push. So you do want to actually start the networking and getting in front of people now if you can. So
Yep.
great stuff. Great advice. Let's hit the segments. All right, it is time for Does It Hold Water, my favorite segment, where I ask our guest to be our resident expert witness for the day. I'll read them a thought, a quote, some piece of thought leadership from the defense, so to speak, and they will let us know if it holds water or not. You ready, Justin?
Ready.
Now, Justin has a background in working with private equity firms. He interviews those leaders all the time. The defense attorney says private equity is ruthless. Private equity has a well-deserved reputation for ripping the soul out of companies after an acquisition. Once the deal closes, they got companies slash those teams and squeeze everything out of them for efficiency, making Ebenezer Scrooge or Mr. Potter proud. What do you say to that?
I say, and this is not a great answer, but it depends. There are firms out there that they have that reputation and they make a lot of money for their investors. And so, it works for them. I would say if you're a startup and you're raising money and you're looking for investors, you want to ask those questions and talk to other people that are part of that investment portfolio, because you may be the founder and you may be like, cool, I want to exit this thing for as much money as I possibly can. And I don't care that they're going to, fire half my staff or whatever. Now you might be on the other side of that where you want to preserve your legacy and your staff and all that fun stuff. So some of them do have that reputation and they're really good at what they do. And so they bring efficiencies in and they slash the talent and bring in technology or whatever, and they make a lot of money. And so if you're an employee and you have equity, that could be great because you can participate in that upside. But you also may be one of those people that gets cut. And so you just got to be prepared for that. But I think there's a time and place for private equity. And sometimes you just got to make sure that you're bringing in the right partner for your scenario.
Yeah, and I think it, like I said, it's going to depend. Now, I asked that just because I think there's a stereotype out there that's a little too harsh, and probably well deserved with some folks. But I think folks are going about it a little more wisely than people might think, and it is a result of that due diligence, that effort that keeps the company going. So
Right.
the alternative in my mind has always been, if we don't do this, ain't nobody going to have a job. So
Yeah. And that's a hard thing to sell to the people that are being cut, right? It's like,
that's
hey,
right.
if the company dies, nobody has a job, right?
Right.
Versus we want to preserve the company for the short and long term. So some people may have to be repurposed or shifted out or whatever. And so, as a business owner, you have to make hard decisions. And as a private equity firm, typically they make those decisions all day, and so they're easier for them to make. And also they don't have to work with the people on a day-to-day basis. So that's the other, other
Mm,
challenges. They're kind of in their ivory tower, saying, hey, let's cut headcount 15%. And it's like, well, I've worked with these folks for 15 years. Like it's not
right,
easy for me to just do that. So um,
right,
yeah, so it depends, but yes, I think some firms have that reputation, and some of them hold that proudly because they are going in and they are going to make a lot of money for whoever their investors are, and that's what private equity is there to do. They get money from investors, they put it into companies, and they return that money with friends back to their investors. That's the whole reason for private equity.
right. So it could be tough, but it's for a reason. So take that for what you will. I just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure we got it out there. Awesome job. Let's move to chip shots. Okay. Time for chip shots, folks. This is the more kind of fun, but yet still professional conversational questions we have. We have 3 or 4 we try to go with. I've mixed in a few new ones, but we always start with the book question. Justin, what is the one book that has significantly influenced your personal professional life, and how did it impact you?
I'll make the answer short or shorter because this is usually how I start all podcasts. But Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki literally changed Allison and I's life. I grew up in a very small town in PA. My financial education was get a good job at a company, invest in your 401k, and hope you have enough money to retire when you're 65 or 70, whatever the number is. And Allison had a very similar education around finance and how to build your wealth, if you will. And so we were both working W-2 jobs, and I just happened to find this book, and I started listening to it. And I listened to it on my walk back and forth to work when we were living in Philadelphia, and it literally was a light bulb. And it literally just talks about how, like, you know, and I'm very, very much summarizing, like, you should be investing your time and money into things that generate wealth for you, not for other people. And you, as a W-2 employee, while you are getting paid to do your job, you are generating wealth for the people at the top of the chain, investors, et cetera. And so I was like, holy cow, like I need to change what we're doing. And Alice and I were married at the time, and so it was nerve wracking because if she didn't have a very similar reaction to the book, we could be on different wavelengths when it comes to our path forward, in our lives. And luckily, she got halfway done with the book, and she's like, "What the heck are we doing? We need to be doing some things different." And so, really quick, like we started investing in real estate. We bought a duplex, and so it was all about building cash flow and passive income from assets. And
And wealth, yeah.
and that led me down the path of starting my own business. I'd always kind of had a thought about starting a recruitment firm, but this just really solidified that decision. And 2 years later, unfortunately, I quit my job January of 2020, which right before the pandemic, which was not a good time to start a recruitment business. So it was poor timing, but I likely would not have done that. I probably wouldn't be on this podcast or whatever. So that book was literally a light bulb moment for us, and has kind of put us on this path of where we are now.
That is so interesting. That is a great point. And one I didn't make that I always think of when you're talking about the W-2 roles is you're working really hard to make somebody else a success
Yeah.
for their wealth. And you might get your bonus and please, I gotta have a bonus this year, please. And you might even get some profit sharing, but it's not much. It's not going to make that much of a difference where right. Well, you're building your own wealth for your success, and yeah, so that is something to consider, especially in the big companies that you work really hard for somebody else to hit their numbers. Which
Yeah.
fine, I'm all for the team. Always been a great teammate, but something to think about as you get a little on in years for sure. Great one. Okay, leader question for you. This is interesting. I can't even know. I have no idea. I try to guess kind of where my guests are going to go with this one. If you could spend the day chatting with a current leader in any profession, any industry, who would it be, and what would you hope to learn?
Well, I kind of wrote down a cheeky one and just put Tiger Woods because I'm sure he could teach me a better way to play golf. But
For
from
sure.
a business perspective, I put Sir Richard Branson, and I thought about this today and I'm not a Richard Branson aficionado. I've read I think one of his books, but when I was looking at this question, I thought about what would I want to learn from him, and the thing I would want to learn is he's owned, invested in, and managed dozens of companies, and yet he lives on Necker Island. He seemingly doesn't work very hard. He has a lot of fun, and I would really like to learn how to find and empower the right people to help him build an empire, because that's effectively what he's done. And there's a
Mm,
book out there that I'll throw out. It's called Who Not How, and he is the master of who not how, which effectively means I grew up in a very, if you want to get something, you just work harder to get it, as opposed to who can I work with, and the who can be technology, it can be a person, it can be a client, or an outsourced. Who can I bring in to help me achieve these goals? And he is the master at that. And so I really would love to sit down with him on Necker Island and just understand how the heck he's done that, and how I can get some of that magic dust.
That's a great one. And somebody has recommended Who Not How as the book before. I can't remember off the top of my head who exactly it
Hmm.
was, but he's quite an interesting fellow, and certainly would be interesting to shadow him for a day. And I am a golf nut, so certainly I identify with the Tiger Woods one. But I'll say this about him: he actually is a really good teacher. He's
Oh
in his
yeah,
later years now that he can't play. He does do
right.
some videos, and he loves talking about golf.
Yeah,
And he explains things. I just watched a series of videos with him and Fred Couples chipping and pitching around the green, and how like Tiger will actually draw and fade chips and pitches, and it's incredible. And even a
jeez,
guy like Fred Couple, right? Fred Couples, who's a major winner, has been around for 30 years, is just laughing at how good he is. And well, lo and behold, all you got to do is this, and he draws his chips and pitches around the thing. Absolutely amazing.
that's
The other
great.
thing I want to say about Tiger Woods that is not just golf related is in between the
Oh yeah,
years. The
yeah,
training, his mind is so trained to be a success and be positive. And I've talked about this before. Golf is not a game of perfect. He does not think of failure. He thinks of success. In other words, if there's water on the left, don't think about the water. You're thinking about hitting a fade down the right or whatever
right.
it is.
Yeah.
So that is the super interesting thing about Tiger. So that actually is a really good one. All right. So let's hit a couple more real quick. What is one decision making principle that guides you when the stakes are high?
So there's another book that's out there called The One Thing. And so I use the concepts in The One Thing whenever I'm trying to make a decision, more or less for like, is this going to get me closer or further away from the one thing? And so, we're recording this at the, around Thanksgiving. And so this is a great time of year to think about your goals for 2026. And so I always sit down with the one thing and think about, okay, where do I want to be? What's the one thing that I could achieve that next year or the next 5 years that would make all the other things that I want to do in life achievable or easier. And so when I think about, am I investing in this company or in this piece of real estate or whatever, how is that getting me closer to the one thing, which is my one goal
Mm,
that Alice and I have for our lives? And is this decision or is this person going to help me get closer to that? And so it's not really a principle, but it's really an overarching kind of thesis of this book. So if you're in a goal setting mindset for in the next month, that's a really good book to read. It's super simple, but it'll help you kind of set some goals for 2026.
yeah, brilliant. Keep your purpose clear and keep your eyes on the road and focus towards it. Awesome one. All right, last quick one because I this is a new one, but I think for you, given you run your own business, you're interviewing people, and you're helping these hiring managers make the right decision. This is going to be an interesting one for you. This I don't think I've asked this one yet. What's one question you always ask customers or clients that never fails to reveal something new?
So whenever I take on a search, or I get brought into a search that's already in motion, meaning they've already tried to fill it on their own, and it just hasn't worked, I always ask them, "What are you looking for in a candidate that you haven't seen so far?" Because if you just say, "Hey, I need to hire a CFO," well, cool, I can go find you a CFO. But if I'm just giving you the same people that you've already seen in different flavors, then it's we're not going to be successful. So I always ask that question because that will help me on my when I'm talking to candidates to make sure that I'm not just giving them the same vanilla person that they've already seen, but I'm giving them the type of person that they really want. And also it reveals, are they looking for a purple unicorn? Because if they're like, well, I want to hire a CFO who also is a salesperson who also knows how to change a tire and do all the other things. Well, I'm like, okay, so you're looking for the purple unicorn or the purple squirrel, whatever you want to call it. And so that also reveals that this is going to be a challenging search, and I'm going to have to really work with this hiring manager to make sure that we are narrowing down what are the must-haves and what are the nice-to-haves.
Yeah, that is an interesting one because I always worry about that with hiring, the hiring process. They're looking for somebody super perfect. Like, I call it their Tom Brady hunting.
Yeah,
They want the greatest quarterback in the history of quarterbacks, and anybody else that's not there is just no good. So,
but they're going to pay pittance, and that's the
but
other
they got to,
problem.
yeah, they're gonna pay them like the Jets. All right, never mind. I'm not going there. So, Justin Dixon, thank you for being such a great guest on your customer success. Let everybody know where they can find you if you don't mind.
I'm all over LinkedIn. Naturally, I'm a recruiter, so I have LinkedIn open 24/7. So if you have any questions about the job search, if you see anybody that I'm connected to that I can help you get in front of, don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah, I love this stuff. This is what I've been doing for 20 years, and yeah, I'm happy to help anybody that I possibly can.
Great. Thank you. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate you helping the audience. So hopefully this has been helpful for everyone. Thank you so much for joining your customer success. I promised to give you these helpful job search tips when I started doing this. We've hit it on a couple of episodes, but keep at it through the holidays. This episode's going to come out somewhere kind of just before Christmas, I believe. But it's not a time necessarily to slow down if you're looking at job search. So keep it going, keep the legs moving until you're in the end zone. All right, I'm going with another sports analogy, Justin. I promised not to do that, but we kept going with them on this one.
Love it.
So no, thanks again. That's all for today. Bye for now. That's a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We hope you found something insightful that will enhance your experiences and drive your success. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review and share your thoughts to help us improve the show. Don't forget to head on over to mariscxhub.com for more ways to connect with me and learn more about experience management. Until next time, I'm Gary Mara, working hard for your customer and your success.